Chapter 19. The moon was full and peeking out between the trees as we stumbled up the farm lane back toward the highway. Jack stumbled and groaned in pain. I knew his arm had to hurt badly, at least just judging from how much the cut on my hand was stinging. Then there was his face. It looked worse than his arm. I tripped in a pothole and almost fell over myself. Be careful, Jack warned as he reached out with his good hand and grabbed me before I tumbled. It's hard to walk. The road is in pretty bad shape. We'll be at the highway soon. And then what are we going to do? We'll try and flag down a car, Jack said as confidently as he could. I can't wait to get home. Mom's going to be so worried. There isn't time to go home, but Mom will just have to stay worried a little bit longer. We have to get to the camp. We have to tell them about the other attacks and warn them that they're the real target, or at least that somebody at the camp is. Up ahead, a flash of light, a passing car, showed how much farther we had to go. Maybe we can speed up, I suggested. My legs are still shaky and I don't want to risk falling. My wrist is really hurting. It throbs every time my heart beats. How's your hand? I looked down. Even in the dim light, I could see that the whole back of my hand was covered in sticky, drying blood. It's almost stopped bleeding, I said. I wish we had something to wrap around it, Jack said. I wish we had a sling for your arm, I answered. The highway was getting closer and closer. We'd soon be there, and I was struck by a thought. Jack, do you think somebody could be waiting for us out there? You mean like they left a guard or something? Yeah. You don't guard dead men. They think we're dead. They're all getting in position for their attack. Not them, I said. Somebody else. Mr. Crumb said there were lots of people like him. Crumb was just talking, either to scare us or maybe so he wouldn't feel so much like a rat and a traitor, Jack said. We stopped at the highway. There were no cars visible in either direction. It was dark and quiet. Which way do we go? The plant is to the right, and the town and the entrance to the camp are to the left. Which is closer? I'm not completely sure, but I think the plant. It was hard to tell from the floor of the car. Maybe we should go there and ask Mr. Granger to call the camp. That might work, but what if we run into somebody? I thought we wanted to run into somebody. I meant some of the Nazis. They're going there to attack the plant. What if they see us coming? You're right, I paused, but they're also going to attack the camp. Either way, there's a chance. The attack on the camp is later. Maybe we can get there before they move into position. We could just try to flag down anything that comes in either direction. We started down the road, traveling right down the center line. It wasn't as if there was a danger of anything sneaking up on us. Something's coming, Jack called out. I stopped and listened. In the dark, I could hear the distant sound of something moving. Then 2 headlights appeared around a curve in the road behind us. It got louder and louder as it closed in. It was a truck headed toward the camp. Hey, Jack yelled. He tried to jump up and down, but he grimaced in pain and grabbed his injured hand. Stop, I yelled, waving my hands in the air. The truck barreled down on us. It got bigger and bigger and bigger and... Get out of the way, Jack screamed. We both scrambled as the truck swooshed by between us, sending a burst of hot air and gravel into our faces. It hadn't even slowed down, and the red taillight soon receded into the distance. It was like he didn't even see us, I exclaimed. I think that truck was from the DIL plant. Even if he saw us, he's not allowed to stop for security reasons, Jack said. Remember? Maybe we should walk on the shoulder, I suggested. We're okay to walk on the road. Just don't stand there when something's coming. What time do you think it is? I'm not sure, but it's got to be close to 10 by now. We have to hurry. Do you think you could go faster without me? I guess I could, but I'm not going anywhere without you, I protested. We're sticking together. At least part of the reason for that was because there was no way I was going to be out there by myself. Then we have to try a shortcut, Jack said. Where do you see a shortcut? That way, Jack pointed off to the forest, through the woods. I think we're almost right on top of the camp. Are you sure? We left the town and headed west. I didn't hear the sound of us crossing over any bridges, so I think we're still east of Corbett's Creek. And if we are, then the camp is just to the south of us. Do you think we can find our way there in the dark? We might bumble and stumble around a bit. I just hope I don't fall on my wrists. I'm more worried that we'll get turned around and end up going in a big circle. So we'll just keep the moon to our left and we'll be okay. No matter what, we won't be able to move very quietly. But we don't want to move quietly. We don't? We're not trying to sneak into the camp. We want to warn them, so the faster we find a guard, the faster we'll be able to tell them about what's happening. That made perfect sense. It also made it seem so much more possible. All we had to do was stumble in the general direction of the camp and make enough noise that the guards would find us. Judging from how hard it was to sneak in, that couldn't be too difficult at all. Still, I didn't want to head into the forest at night. Something's coming, Jack shouted. Up ahead, lights appeared. The vehicle was coming from the direction we wanted to go, but that didn't matter. If we could flag it down, we could still avoid a trip through the dark woods. The lights got brighter as it got near. Judging from the size, it was a car. Let's make sure this one at least sees us, Jack said. He walked off the shoulder and into the lane of the oncoming car. Reluctantly, I followed, remembering how the big truck had just missed us. Wave your hands, Jack yelled. I started to jump up and down and wave my arms in the air. The lights were coming closer, and I had to fight the urge to run off the road and back onto the shoulder. But this was our last chance before we had to head into the bush. Jack began to yell, and I yelled too. The car seemed to be slowing down, or was I just hoping it was? Yes, it was. It was definitely slowing down. I heard the rumble of gravel as it pulled over on the shoulder. It's stopping, I yelled. It pulled completely off the road, came to a stop right in front of us, and it was a police car. The door opened and out popped Chief Smith. I was stunned. Why was he here? I've been looking for you boys, he exclaimed. My mind raced in different directions. He was the chief of police, so of course he knew we were missing and would be out to find us. But how did he happen along right here? Unless he was coming to the deserted farmhouse because he knew. He knew we were in the farmhouse because he was one of them. You're in big trouble, he exclaimed. Into the car right now. I looked over at Jack, searching for some sign to tell me what to do. His eyes were wide open, at least the one not starting to swell shut. Jack, I asked softly. He turned to me. What do we do? He looked back at the chief, who was now walking towards us, and then to me. Run, he hissed. I burst off the road, taking a step in one direction before realizing that Jack was running across the road in the other. I skidded around and raced after him. Wait, yelled the chief. Stop! I raced down the shoulder of the road, almost tumbling onto my face as I hit the ditch at the bottom and scrambled up the other side. I braced myself, waiting for the sound of a bullet and the searing pain as it entered my back. Instead, tree branches smacked into me, stinging my face as I broke into the cover of the forest. Come back, the chief yelled. I staggered forward, desperately trying to gain some ground in the pitch black. I tripped and landed heavily on the forest floor with something hard sticking into my side. Then I scrambled forward on all fours, not knowing where I was going, but certain I needed to get farther from the road. Finally, my hand slipped out from under me, and I fell into a puddle of shallow water. I raised my head and didn't move. I just listened. There was no sound. Not the noise of somebody coming after me, no sounds of the forest, not even the sound of breathing. I realized I was holding my breath. Listen to me, boys, the chief's voice bellowed out. I didn't mean to scare you. Come on back to the road. I need to get you home to your mother. She's worried sick about you. I'd forgotten all about Mom. She had to be scared to death, wondering what happened to us. Whatever mischief you boys have gotten into can't be that bad. You come out now and everything will be forgotten. I'll just drive you home, okay? I did want to go home, and he sounded sincere. Maybe we just overreacted and he'd be able to warn them at the camp. He wasn't a spy. Just because his family had once come from Germany, so had ours. Besides, if he was a spy, I was sure that the people at the camp would have known. And yet they hadn't known about Mr. Crumb. I looked all around me in the dark. Somewhere out there, maybe just a dozen feet away, was Jack. He'd know what we should do. Come on, boys, we can't wait here all night. Don't make me come in there and get you. Then I will be mad. That sealed it for me. I wasn't going back to the road, and I couldn't just wait there in case he did come after us. I slowly rose to my feet. I was just going to keep moving farther into the forest, farther away from the chief. I took a few steps and then froze. That also meant I was probably moving farther away from my brother. I turned my head away from the road. Jack, I hissed. There was no answer. Jack, I called out louder. What was that? Obviously the chief had heard me. Are you trying to find your way out? I'll keep talking so you can come toward my voice. I caught a glimpse of the moon through the trees. Jack had said we should just keep moving and keep the moon on our left, and we'd be able to find the camp. I started to walk slowly, the moon over my left shoulder, the chief's booming voice directly behind me. I'd keep moving away quietly and then stop and call out for Jack when I was farther from the road and safe. It wasn't long before the chief's voice started to fade. I kept moving until I couldn't hear him at all. Either I'd put enough space between us or he'd stopped calling, or both. The trees started to thin out, and without the canopy above me, more light was hitting the forest floor to brighten my path. Up ahead, I could see that the trees and bush gave way completely to an open field. Was this the camp? No, it couldn't be. I hadn't hit the railroad embankment yet. The embankment, that was what would guide me. Once I hit the embankment, I'd simply follow the tracks until I hit one of the culverts and then head along the road. I stopped at the edge of the field, which was bathed in bright moonlight. It would be easy to see my way, but I would also be visible to anybody as I crossed the field. That could be good if it was Jack who was looking for me, or bad. There were other people heading for the camp too, people I never wanted to see again. Either way, I couldn't stay there. I'd just taken my first step into the field when I heard some sounds off to the side. I swiveled my head to look, but I couldn't see anything. The sound continued. Somebody or something was moving through the bush. Slowly, I lowered myself to the ground and took shelter in the knee-high grass. Whatever it was coming closer. I flattened myself until only the very top of my head protruded out of the grass. As long as I stayed perfectly still, perfectly quiet, I knew that something could practically bump right into me without seeing me. Jack! I screamed, jumping up from my hiding spot. I ran over and threw my arms around him. I was so scared and, "Be quiet, you little idiot," he hissed. "He's right behind us." "Who?" "The chief," he whispered. "He's coming after us through the trees." I turned my head in the direction we'd both just come. There was the unmistakable sound of somebody else breaking through the underbrush. "Can you run?" Jack asked. "Sure, of course." "Good. We have to get across that field before he gets this far." We started to run. The ground was level and flat, and we were moving fast, the grass swishing against our legs. I looked back over my shoulder. The edge of the forest was black. We wouldn't be able to see anybody coming out of the trees, but I was positive that they would still see us. Up ahead, the far edge of the field was looming, and beyond that it simply looked black as the forest on the other side. I tried to pick out individual images, a gap between the trees, rocks, an opening we could head for, something, but it remained just a dark blur stretching out on sight in both directions, rising up into the sky, and the embankment. There were the railroad tracks. We stopped at the foot of the embankment, and I peered up to the top. "Do we follow along until we hit the road, or do we climb it?" I asked. "Both," Jack said. "We climb it and then follow along on the other side." I started up the bank, using my hands to dig in and help pull me up the steep slope. My feet dislodged rocks and cinders, and they noisily showered down the slope toward my brother. Looking down, I could see that Jack was struggling. He held his injured hand tightly to his chest. "Let me help you," I called out. I reached back and grabbed him by his good arm. At that same instant, he lost his footing and almost fell over. I struggled to maintain both my grip and my balance, and were just barely able to keep us both upright. Together we climbed up. Repeatedly I tripped and felt the cinders and rocks bite into my knees, but I clawed my way forward until we both reached the top. "Maybe we should rest here," I said, panting. "Not here. Too much of a target," Jack replied. I looked back and suddenly felt very exposed. I could imagine how visible we'd be, our silhouettes standing out on the horizon. Involuntarily, I ducked down. "We'll rest at the bottom," Jack said. I didn't need any more encouragement. I shuffled over to the other side and dropped down on my bottom. I slid down feet first for a couple of yards. Rocks rained down before me, but at least I was less likely to fall. "Go down like this," I called back to Jack over my shoulder. "I'll try." For a few seconds, I'd forgotten about Jack not being able to use his hand and that he needed me. "Just come down this way. I'll wait for you and help," I offered. Jack started to pick his way down the slope. His feet slipped out from under him, and without thinking, he reached back with his hands to cushion the blow so that he cried out in pain. I scrambled back up and offered a hand. He willingly took it. As we moved down the slope, I thought how strange it was that I was the one helping Jack, and he was letting me. This was so different, something new for us. Again, Jack let out a yelp. There was no point in asking him if he was all right, because I could see, even in the limited light, that his face was distorted with pain. "It's not much further," I said reassuringly. "Let me help you down, and then we'll just have to walk. We'll find somebody, or somebody will find us soon. I know they will." Slowly together, we slid down the rest of the slope. I could feel my socks and shoes filling up with cinders as we slipped to the very bottom, sending a shower of debris ahead of us. I'd stood up and was beginning to dust myself off when I became aware that the whole palm of my hand, my good hand, was raw and cut and bleeding. What will happen next, I wondered. Jack was slumped on the ground. "I'm almost positive I know where we are," he said. "You do?" "We've been right here before. We came in off the creek from over there," he said, pointing off to a spot invisible in the darkness. "But isn't that how the Nazis were going to be coming in? Off the creek?" "I don't know. Maybe. They were asking us all sorts of questions about how we got in," I reminded him. Suddenly, I pictured the darkness around us filled with Nazi agents, all armed, all wanting to kill us. I couldn't imagine anything worse than surviving all we'd survived, getting away and getting this far, only to be recaptured, and killed. "Let's get moving that way," I said, pointing away from the creek, "as fast as we can." Jack struggled to his feet as we started to move along the base of the railroad embankment. "You said you knew where we are. Are we far from a road? You remember that first night we came here?" he asked. "That would be hard to forget. I think the culvert and that dirt track are just up ahead, but we have to move quickly or it's going to be too late." We moved to the side away from the embankment. The ground was much more level and easier to move along quickly, and we were far enough away from the chief that I wasn't worried about him seeing us. "There's the track," Jack said. I strained my eyes to make out a dark ribbon of road cutting through the field. I followed it until it met the embankment and disappeared underneath. The culvert. Still holding on to Jack's good arm, I pulled him along with me. I stumbled forward, not stopping until we broke out onto the dirt track. "That's where they first stopped us," Jack said, pointing back into the culvert. "They heard us in the culvert. Maybe that's what we should do this time. Go into the culvert and start yelling. Let's just head down the road toward headquarters." And suddenly we were hit square in the face by a blinding light, and my hands went up instinctively to shield my eyes. "Hands in the air," screamed out a voice. Is it? Jack nodded his head. "It's guards from the camp." "Thank goodness," I whispered. "Hands up now or we'll shoot." I slowly raised my hands. Beside me, Jack raised one hand right up. The second one, the injured one, was barely at the level of his head. "It's us," I called out. "Jack and George. We've got to see the—" "Shut up," hissed one of the soldiers as he came toward us. He turned back around to the Jeep. "And kill those lights, now!" Suddenly we were plunged into darkness.